Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Future Mind. Today, we have Federico Faggin, a physicist born and educated in Italy, who co-invented and developed the MOS silicon gate technology at Fairchild Semiconductor and designed the world's first microprocessor at Intel. He founded the nonprofit Federico and Elvia Faggin Foundation dedicated to the science of consciousness. He received the 2009 National Medal of Technology and Innovation from President Barack Obama. Àlex Gómez-Marín is a Spanish physicist turned neuroscientist. Since 2016, he has been the head of the Behavior of Organisms Laboratory at Alicante, where he is an associate professor of the Spanish Research Council. I will now hand the discussion over to Àlex.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone. So good to be back with you all. And thank you, Federico, for accepting this invitation. I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I suppose everyone watching and tuning in now knows about you, and probably all of you may know that there's this recent book of yours that just came out. Let's talk about this and more things. And I wanted to start by reading Bernardo Castro's endorsement of the book. So Bernardo says, Federico Faggin is probably the most well-rounded idealist alive. He embodies the near-perfect combination of hard-nosed, scientifically informed thought, which with direct introspective insights into the primacy of consciousness, irreducible, is a true philosophical treasure and, in some ways, a culmination of Western thought, an absolute must-read. So, what is irreducible about, and why did you write it, Federico?
Well, the book represents the culmination of 36, 37 years in trying to understand consciousness. At the beginning, I tried to do that from the viewpoint of a materialist and reductionist scientist, since I'm a physicist. And it wasn't until after an extraordinary experience of consciousness that occurred about 34 years ago that I realized that the viewpoint of science, of the physicalism, I would call it more than science, or the scientism that dominates today our worldview, is actually cannot really account for the nature of consciousness, the nature of our inner experiences, and the fact that we know that we have a certain modicum of free will. So it took, as I said, 34 years after that experience to really explore consciousness from a direct experience, through direct experiencing, through various forms of meditations and so on, no drugs, however, that allow me to arrive to a theory, the first theory that I know of, a true theory of consciousness that explains the same free will, the phenomena that are so far misunderstood about quantum physics. So this book is also due to a collaboration with Giacomo Mauro Dariano, who is one of the top 10 experts in quantum information in the world, that together we arrive at the sort of the core of this theory, whereas the framework around the theory was what allowed to sharpen our understanding and get to this full theory that is described in the book.
Before we go into the theory, and I'm very curious about what you just said, being the first theory that can really explain, I want to ask you, of course, about the theory and about what it counts as an explanation of consciousness and free will. But before that, I'd like to understand whether, if I can put it this way, in your previous life when you were working and developing all this technology and you hadn't had that spiritual awakening, whether then physicalism and even scientism was working for you. If that was not a problem at all, maybe you even was a kind of a superpower to believe in that way of using science, or already there, you could say a new paradigm would have helped you better.
Well, basically, scientism could not account for the fact that I was unhappy after having achieved everything that this worldview says that if I should achieve those objectives, I should be happy. So the fact that I wasn't happy was a major problem, a problem of consciousness, if I may say so, because you know, I had all the reasons to be happy, and that was also the common wisdom that if you are, you know, you're healthy, you have a beautiful family, you're rich and famous, you should be happy, and I wasn't. So my, you know, I would think that the honesty with which I had to accept that I wasn't happy was actually the springboard for an experience of extraordinary experience of consciousness that revealed that I'm not a body, revealed that I'm much more than a body. I'm not a phenomenon of my brain, because if it were, my consciousness could not be outside of my body. So, you know, that experience simply upturned the understanding that I had about consciousness that came from science. And so all of this made it possible for me to then explore deeply what before would have been impossible to explore without that experience, because that experience provided the motivation and a deep understanding that require, however, clarification through other experiences, through thoughts, and trying to connect the dots between science and spirituality that was for the first time revealed to me through that experience.
Yes, yes. And this leads me to the other thing I wanted to ask you before we dive into your theory, which is what changes our mind, right? Because sometimes, at least as academics, we believe that being persuasive or more clearer or more eloquent about our particular way of seeing consciousness is what will make it. But, you know, in your case, and also in my case, which I won't unfold here, it was one or a series, a few very potent experiences that just open it up for this to happen. So I wonder what you think about what would change people's minds and hearts if it is the eloquent arguing of the theory, or it's really something that will happen to them, or maybe both, or in what order?
I think you need both. I think that if you have, unless you have the, you know, you're lucky enough to have an experience that changes your mind, a direct experience of consciousness that changes your mind. Only if you're questioning your assumptions, then would a theory be helpful to open you up to want to experience what the new theory reveals. In other words, you are open to the possibility that there is more to consciousness than an epiphenomenon of the brain or an emergent property of the brain. But because without that, people would not even try. You know, if they believe that they are right, that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, for example, forget it. I mean, why should I waste my time to try to prove otherwise? I'm sure that that's the way it is, even if it is, you know, a wrong idea. So to me, you need one and the other, and not necessarily in a particular order. But one opens you out to a direct experience opens you out to explore then what you discover, because unless you're incoherent with yourself, you know, you cannot be the same after such an experience. And if you have a theory that you know sounds plausible to you, then try to understand it better, but then you have to open up to want to experience directly, to have a proof. Because the problem with consciousness is it is a phenomenon, is a private phenomenon. It cannot be proven in any form or way, if not through an inner experience. The fact that we, and by the way, that's also the property of quantum information, which is non-reproducible. In other words, you cannot reproduce a quantum state in a lab or in another person. So, quantum physics has exactly the properties of a conscious experience, and that's really where this theory makes sense, because this is not true for a computer, for example. A computer, you can copy the data in the program, and therefore you can create copies of the state of the computer as many times as you want. That's not the property of consciousness, nor the property of quantum information.
So in the genealogy, in your forming of a theory, was this kind of the beginning of it, like this initial analogy, if you want, that both experience and quantum phenomena share this privacy at some level? Was this the beginning for you to work on the theory and then make the analogy concrete and mathematical? Was this the beginning?
Well, but for me, the beginning was 20 years of personal work trying to understand the nature of consciousness. It wasn't obvious. I mean, it's obvious after you have thought a lot that must be true. What I just said, that conscious, my experience is for example, is private. That the love that you feel for a person cannot be shared. I mean, you can share symbolically. You can say, I love you. You can express in your facial expressions, something which is coherent with your words and what have you, but you cannot transfer what you feel to another. And there is no, in physics, there is nothing like that except quantum information. Quantum information, and I mean the states of a field, cannot be transferred to another person. But to get there took about 30 years. So first I had to understand, what consciousness is by, turning inward and paying attention to my inner life, where before I was working in, essentially believing, like science, that all that exists is, objects in space and time. I mean, most scientists, most physicists believe that quantum physics is simply a mathematical theory that allows you to make predictions about what you measure in space and time. So they don't give any reality to what quantum physics is saying. They only give reality to what you can measure in space and time. Well, once you have realized that your own experience has none of the properties of objects in space and time, well, then you better begin to think about quantum physics saying something more deeper about the nature of reality. But that comes after a lot of work. So yes. The first job was to really understand what consciousness is, and free will was, understood from the beginning to be an integral part of our consciousness. In other words, without free will, consciousness means nothing. What good is it for you to know, to have an experience if you cannot direct your experience with some level of free will? So that doesn't make any sense. And free will without consciousness is even less sensible, because free will implies that you have an objective, that you have an intention, that you want to achieve something. Otherwise, what is free will? So those two things, seen as as integral part of the same entity, is foundational, and took a lot of time to get there. So 20 years were, the time that I spent just to arrive to the hypothesis that consciousness and free will had to be foundational, had to be properties of nature prior to the existence of a brain. In fact, prior to existence of matter, perhaps, or simultaneously with the existence of matter, but certainly not derivative from matter that has no consciousness. So 20 years of work to get there, and then saying, okay, now if something is fundamental like this, now then physics must also join the party and try to understand how to connect physics to spirituality, having having allowed to accept that there is a deeper reality than what exists in space and time. And now we have a theory, but also the theory, it took me a fair amount of time discussing with that Professor Dariano, who had shown that quantum information can derive from quantum information. So quantum physics can derive from quantum information. So quantum information is senior to quantum physics. That was the dream of John Wheeler, who coined the phrase "it from bit," meaning that information had to be more fundamental than matter. But it was just an intuition. But Dariano and his collaborators, I had nothing to do with this. He was able to show that you can mathematically show that quantum information, from quantum information, you can derive quantum physics. And that was an essential aspect of the theory that allowed me to say to Dariano, but look, quantum information is still information without meaning. And for us, meaning is fundamental. So meaning has to be even more fundamental than information. Information is just like the outer aspect of reality, and meaning is the inner aspect of reality, which is even deeper and even more profound. So the ontology in my model had to be with meaning, and qualia were simply the bringer of meaning. They were the way through which consciousness could then derive comprehension and meaning from those qualia. So, and qualia, by the way, are not numbers. The love that I feel for a person that I love, for my son, is not a number, cannot be a number. What you measure is a number, but those inner aspects are not numbers. So all of that was part of the beginning of joining the two, and then together we were able to actually bring them to closure and say,
Yes.
okay, we can explain, if we start with consciousness and free will, then we can explain why quantum physics has to have the crazy properties that it has. First, quantum information has to be the representative of qualia. A quantum state that has two fundamental properties. Number one, three. One is it is a definite state, just like an inner conscious state is, just like qualia is a definite state. It has to, it is not reproducible. That's a theorem of quantum information, is the no cloning theorem, so you cannot reproduce a state. And the third is that what you can know about that state by making a measurement, for example, or by you saying something about your state, is much less than what you feel, in the sense that what you can say is at most a bit, what you can measure and what you can say is at most a bit per quantum bit. And the quantum bits that represent the state are also entangled, which is another property of quantum physics that nobody understands why it must be there. Well, entanglement is what connects the quantum bits and is what connects the totality of the universe. So the universe has to be holistic, be reductionistic. Everything must be connected within one. So the last step is then to say, because even in irreducible, I was a bit ambivalent, because on one sense I was saying that quantum physics can explain consciousness and free will, and of course also quantum physics can explain free will, because free will, if you have consciousness, then free will can exist. And then free will is how you interpret the collapse of the wave function, because the collapse of the wave function is a transformation, is an event that takes many possibilities, and from many possibilities of which you know the probabilities, all the probabilities of these many possibilities, you arrive at one actuality, which is one of these many possibilities, but there is no laws that tells you how to get there. So for all practical purposes, this collapse involves a pure randomness on one end, but also non-algorithmic randomness. In other words, there are no laws or algorithms that can tell you what will happen. Well, those are exactly the properties of free will. So once you have proven that consciousness has to have those properties, then the collapse of the wave function, which is the other incomprehensible aspect of quantum physics, become the free will decision of the field that is conscious. So
no, sorry. I was going to ask, would this mean that a quantum system, when it collapses, it's free, it's choosing what to do in the same way that we would choose? So how to understand, because you seem...
No, it's clear. So basically, what is conscious? Then what is conscious is a field. The fields are conscious, and the fields, they have consciousness and free will, and the consciousness is an inner property of a quantum field. The states of the fields, on the other hand, are the classical. It's not classical. Is I call it live information. Unfortunately, I have to introduce some concepts that are physicists that have not yet introduced. But I have to introduce the idea of live information, which is the information that is between the quantum state and classical information. For example, atoms and molecules that interact quantumly in space and time. Those are examples of live information, because the information of a computer, the bits interact classically with each other. The quantum bits interact quantumly with entanglement with each other. So there is something in between that can explain life. That's why I call it live information, because they can explain how life works. Life cannot be explained using a classical machine, concepts of a classical machine or a computer. That's another aspect, a very important aspect, that only in the last 5-10 years, some scientists are beginning to explore through what is called quantum biology. Quantum biology tries to explain life as a quantum phenomenon, which quantum biology was ostracized for, once it started, was ostracized for 10 years, and then now it's sort of tolerated. But most scientists still believe that life is a classical phenomenon, when it isn't. It's clear that within a cell, within a cell, the interactions are quantum interaction between atoms and molecules. No, they're not statistical interactions like classical physics. They are quantum interactions, and nobody understands how they might work. So we have to go back.
Yes, and I was actually going to ask you, and thank you for this explanation. So I wanted to go back a little bit and say, so you were describing on the one hand the experiential journey that you had, and the kind of the inner work, as in many, if not all traditions, those understanding about the nature of reality and consciousness. On the other path is what you can do with science. And as you're describing, and you were doing this movement as well, right? Like you're putting both together. Now, yes, exactly. So I want to ask you about this, like the kind of the final touches of this, because I seriously joke with this. I say, let's not ask so much what science can do for consciousness, but more what consciousness can do for science. And it seems to me that in doing that, you're enriching our understanding of physics, because now you have interiority where we didn't have before. Now you have meaning where we didn't have, and now you have free will where we didn't have, even if you take some of the more, creative and even sound interpretations of quantum physics. So you're doing more work for science actually than for consciousness in putting these things together, wouldn't you say?
No, both. I think both, Alex, because spirituality generally has not used rationality that much, and the rationality of physics and the way to think like a physicist, which is to think rationally and logically about things, is foundational, is fundamental. So once you join the two, both are transformed because the aspects that work for one will also work for the other, and vice versa. And so you in fact, I call, not in the book, in this irreducible book, but in the new book, I call nusim, with the capital N, the new discipline that comes out once you start with a postulate that says consciousness and free will exist. They must be taken as postulate. You cannot prove them, but you can actually, if you start from the existence of consciousness and free will as a postulate, then you can explain why quantum physics must have the properties that it has. Where before I was saying, if you start from quantum physics and start to explain consciousness, you are essentially saying that consciousness derives from the mathematics of quantum physics, but it is consciousness that creates the mathematics. So how can you see? How can you explain the creator from the creation? You see. So
now there's another movement here now.
I just turn things around.
Yes.
Poof,
Yes.
And that is an idea that came to me about 6 months ago as I was finishing my last book, that changes completely the way you understand now, because now there is only one direction from consciousness and free will that you have assumed as true, to explaining, because any postulate must explain. It explains why quantum physics has the properties that it has, also explains why there must be a classical physics, because classical physics is what is needed for the fields to communicate with each other, and also to have the memory of their experience. So memory of the experience and communication require, what I call live information. At the level, live information at the level of the fields, and classical information at the level of organisms, like living organism. We communicate. So there are 3 levels of reality: quantum fields, which is conscious and has free will, and we are quantum fields. The quantum fields controls a living organism, which is quantum and classical, and the quantum and classical communicate with each other with live information, and then the organism that communicates classically with the outer world, the world in which it exists, what we call space, time, and matter, and energy. So these 3 levels now explain basically the essence of reality, and and that now you can now explain fundamentally everything, and you can explain all the extraordinary experiences that people have, and everything else. And at the same time, nothing is changed of what physics is saying. There is no laws that have been changed by this, but it's just a new interpretation that changes completely what we understand about nature. And I must, one more thing, and then because otherwise, I may not say it later because I forget. The crucial thing here is that, and I already forgot now.
Sorry. You will come back. You will come back. It's just that I have so many questions.
It will come back. It will come back.
So you said there are no, so there it's an interpretation, but is it more than that? Are there new laws or new predictions? Is this theory testable? And also, I'll just sneak it in the question too. I mean, if we play science, we know that quantum physics is incomplete, ultimately probably wrong, as all views that we come up through science. So what happens if the guys that go after a theory of everything, which, you know, I'm not very excited about that anyways, realized by trying to put together quantum mechanics and relativity that quantum is not what we thought it was. So also there are different interpretations. So what I'm asking now is about how strong the foundations are in terms of if quantum changes, and also does your theory make predictions, and are these testable or not yet?
Yeah, I mean, the theory makes prediction. For example, it makes the prediction that which is already, it makes a lot of prediction that are already being tested, and nobody understands why it must be that way, for example, right? In other words, when he explains why quantum physics must be the way it is, because a quantum state, which is foundational based on the theory of D'Ariano, where quantum physics derives from quantum information, quantum states, then why does a quantum state need to be non-reproducible? Why does it need to be non-clonable? That the physicists cannot explain it. That's a theorem of physics, the mathematics that we use. That's it. Take it or leave it. Well, but science should also explain, not just giving you there the way it is, because when you do that, is a cop out, as you know. So we have to go beyond that. We have to explain. Now, this theory can explain, for example, why you can have a near-death experience when the brain doesn't work. It is telling you that consciousness is not a property of the brain. It's already a property of fields that exist before there are brains. so in fact, it allows you to it can be tested indirectly, because you cannot test directly something that cannot be reproduced. But that's not the problem with the theory. The problem is with quantum information that physicists have already discovered that cannot be reproduced, you see. But it's also a characteristic of our inner experience, that we cannot share what we feel. We can share the description of what we feel, but not what we feel directly. And that's, when you open the skull of a person and you do measurements, what you measure is classical information. You don't measure the feeling of the person whose, information you have tested. So all of those things are crucial now, and this theory allows you to explain it, and allows to make predictions that for example, the also out-of-body experiences can be explained with this theory. They cannot be explained with any theory that claims that consciousness is a property of the brain. The brain, because if it's a property of the brain, it must be within the brain. It cannot be outside of the brain. And
another of my mottos is, yes, beyond the brain, but back to it. So what's the role of the brain? What's the brain doing? How do we think about the role? Because it has a key role in the act.
Absolutely.
So what's going on, for instance, during a near-death experience when I'm seeing myself from above, and then I remember that when I come back. How is the brain mediating? Is it because I assume your theory works within the notion of the brain as permissive and not so much as productive. But what's going on there?
Well, the way I look at the situation now would be like, the body is like an AI system, okay? Just a computer, just a robot with AI, okay? Because AI may not have, may not be able to act in the world directly, but a robot can. And so a robot, a robot controlled by AI is similar, not quite like the body. The body is much more because it's quantum and classical, and the robot is only classical. Okay, but the differences are not so strong here because the pairing that I'm making is the following. You basically imagine yourself controlling a robot with AI that then controls the world, acts in the world. Okay, then you communicate to that robot what you want, and the robot is semi-autonomous, but so it can act whatever he has already learned. It can actually act if you let it act, just like our consciences allow me to drive a car without interrupting my driving, as long as the situation is normal. But then the conscience would intervene if it perceives a situation which is abnormal, and then all of a sudden it grabs it sort of grabs consciously the wheels of the car. Well, before you were, before I was thinking everything else, but not driving. The driving was automatic. So when you do that, so our situation is like an intelligent AI robot that has associated the programmers and the trainer with it. But the programmer and the trainer is kind of like is hidden. It's not inside the robot. It's connected with some what it would be live information in our analogy with the robot. So it communicates with the robot through live information, which is electromagnetic in this case. Just electromagnetic waves. And then the robot acts in the world, but in acting in the world, it does what the conscious being that I am, wants the robot to do. This is the same thing. So there are these three levels of activity that don't exist when a robot acts as an independent actor. The robot simply then since it doesn't understand, it doesn't have comprehension. The robot can get into a situation where it doesn't understand. It can create all kinds of havoc if it doesn't understand. And that's the fundamental difference. This, by the way, also explains clearly what happens with AI when AI is not controlled by a human being. That that it can only do properly work properly in situations where the outer world is comprehensible by what he already knows. The AI machine already knows. But if it goes outside of the examples that he had, the situation that he had seen, the robot doesn't know what to do. It basically, it is completely frozen, so to speak, where our consciousness is the creative part of us and can only get us. My body can find solutions, not always, but can definitely have the potential to find solutions for us to get over difficult situations.
And then an AI that's powered by a quantum computer be conscious? Where do you lay in that? Because this is forcing us to think about consciousness in a more urgent way, given the recent advances, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, first of all, a quantum computer is not a quantum field. It doesn't have free will. The quantum computer is deterministic. The algorithm it's using is a deterministic algorithm. So a quantum computer cannot do anything that a classical computer cannot do. It can only do it faster. Okay, so number one. But while the quantum computer is actually operating, there is associated with that quantum computer, there is a quantum state that is conscious. But the consciousness of that quantum state is not in the computer. and is not connected with the computer because there is no field there. It's just there are qualia without any owner of the qualia. In other words, there is no free will. So consciousness without free will cannot act in the world. You see?
So how do these fields then become you or my sense of free will?
These fields combine just like atoms and molecules combine. And by the way, atoms and molecules, the atoms, let's start with the particles. Particles combine to create atoms, okay? But the particles are not objects. The particles are state of the quantum fields. So for example, the electrons, with the electrons, what we call electrons, are states in the states of the quantum field of electron that cannot be separated from the quantum field, just like a wave of the sea cannot be separated from the sea. So the property of the states, in other words, the property of the electrons, are the properties of the field and not the property. In other words, the electrons are not independent elements of reality. They are not objects. They are states of the field.
So do you need dissociation as a process so that you can be you and I can be me?
Well, in this model, in this theory, the quantum field of electrons is an entity like us. It is conscious, has free will, and can communicate through the electrons that it creates with its own states, can communicate with other fields. It can interact with other fields. So but before I get to that question, let me explain how two fields can combine and create a field which is of a higher order. You know, when a field of electrons interact with the field of protons, they can combine eventually. Once they create a joint, they can create a joint state, inner state, which is a joint comprehension, is a joint understanding that once that maximum joint understanding has been reached, you can create a new field, which is the field of hydrogen, whose symbol is the atom of hydrogen, which is a symbol, it's not an object. The atom of hydrogen is the combination of an electron and a proton, and it has properties that are completely different than the property of the electron and the properties of the proton. In classical physics, this cannot happen because the sum of the whole is simply the sum of the properties of the parts. So the properties of the whole are only the sum of the properties of the parts. And this is one of the major problems, again, with physics or science, where they are introducing the emergent properties as if you could have emergent properties from a classical system. No, emergent properties can only emerge from quantum systems. Only quantum systems have creative properties, like when an electron and a proton combine, they create an atom that has properties that are not the sum of the properties of the electron and the proton. Much richer properties. That is the creativity of one in action, okay? And that has to be taken as a property because of course, we already know. I mean, science, physicists cannot explain why you can have this thing. You know, you take it for good, but they are confused when they expect those properties to be classical. Those properties are purely quantum. They're purely quantum. So we are fields of fields of fields of fields. As far as physics today, the fields, the concept of field is applied only to the foundation fields, to the elementary fields. But since the electron is a state of a field, and the proton is a state of the other field, the proton field, once they combine, they cannot separate from the field. So we have to have a new field. We cannot have, you know, so what I'm saying is that the concept that physicists have today is incomplete. There has to be there has to be a field associated with atoms of hydrogen. There had to be field associated with molecules. There had to be fields associated with, with more complex systems. And therefore, there will be a field associated with who we are. You see, and then my body is simply the symbol created and used by that field to communicate with other fields, exactly like the electron is a symbol to communicate with the symbol of protons, or the field of protons, in order to know itself. And the foundational property of reality has to be that one wants to know itself.
Many of my physicist friends have, and biologists too, they also speak about levels, they speak about complexity, they speak about emergence, and I would say they would agree with all you've said without needing to base it all on consciousness or on quantum. Now, where does your theory lie within the landscape of isms? And I had the privilege talking to Robert Lawrence Kuhn at the beginning of the year, and he's recently published a landscape, a comprehensive article with more than 200, I think it's 220 something theories or approaches to consciousness. So where would you fit yours, and how do your theory, how do you want it to relate to others? Because sometimes it sounds like an idealism, and I think that's also why Bernardo is so excited about it, but also it could be seen as a new kind of physicalism because of this insistence on fields and quantum, maybe pan-experiential as well, because at the end of the day, there's experience, or there's this proto-psyche everywhere. Where do you find comfortable locating it?
Well, because contrary to most people, most people study these things by, by their own personal interest, reading the thoughts of other people, trying to combine them, find ways to, to solve, problems that the other haven't solved, and so on. But it is an intellectual exercise. I arrive at all what I did primarily, not only, but primarily through direct experiences of consciousness. So my source of information is the direct experience of consciousness in various forms that allow me to, that wanted to be explained. And so, so I was trying to explain my own experiences, not what somebody else is saying. And so I don't, I haven't spent any time to figure out what other people are saying, because it's not productive to me. I mean, because I want to understand what I know to be true, because I know the difference between direct experience and indirect experience of consciousness. So, and probably just because of this, there is a theory now that is consistent with physics, because I wanted to explain also the physics. I know the physics, and the physics is right. It makes right predictions. So how can you throw away physics because, because it doesn't fit your model? No, it has to be explained too. And so my theory with Dariano explains both, and in fact enriches both. And so it's a step forward that has to, go through its proper, the proper vetting with experiments and everything else, just like any other scientific theory. So it's not it's not just philosophy, or and so I'm not too fond of, the isms. I'm actually, idealism, realism, materialism, and what have you, fine, but they're not enough. We got to go beyond that. And that's where I see that, for example, that consciousness will be the primary instrument with which we as conscious being, which is not, for me, consciousness is not a, is a property, is not, is not a thing, is a property of a being which is conscious and has free will and has the ability to act and comprehend. Okay, so consciousness is what allows the being to comprehend its experience and comprehend also what it wants. So the entity is what I call sati, is a self, is an entity that is a field from the physical point of, from the physics point of view, would be a field, but a field that doesn't exist in space and time is a field that exists in a deeper reality than space and time, out of which space and time emerges as emerges as perceived by the body. Is the body in its perception and in its brain that through the elaboration of the sensory perceptions creates this reality as if it was reality, but it isn't. It is just a small part of reality. It's only the part that the senses have seen, but we believe that to be reality. So in this sense, I'm very close to Don Hoffman, who also believes clearly that what we see is not even close to what's here.
Yes.
But I go deeper in the sense that I believe that there is a deeper reality described by quantum physics that is the interiority of nature, out of which everything that is symbolic, is expressible in some sort of, space-time and matter and energy. But
Yes, they're like two sides. Like when I put
yeah.
my daughters to sleep, I feel their presence and what I see as very real. So I'm a bit reactive to theories that suggest that kind of everything we see is an illusion. And at the same time, I can admit that we're not seeing everything there is. But I like to believe that, that this is very real, not just some sort of shadow that has no intrinsic reality beyond something that we can never grasp. Otherwise, it seems like we're never really able to be in contact with the real, and that feels very alienating. I always have trouble with this word, alienating.
Yeah, this reality, I said, the physical reality is quasi-virtual reality, and I want to put this stress on quasi because the particles, the elementary particles, are states of the field. So this reality is connected with the fields. This reality, which is symbolic, is connected with the fields in a way that you cannot disconnect it. So that's where the reality comes. It comes from that connection with the fields.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a list of things, and that doesn't mean to be a multiple choice test, but talking about seities and these kind of entities or beings that are conscious. I am conscious, you're conscious, you would agree. My cat, I would say it's conscious. Well, what about a fruit fly? What about a bacterium? What about a tree? What about the sun? And what about a pen? Because that's something that's demanded of many of the theories today. Please tell us in this scale what is and what isn't. So what would you say about these items that I just presented to you?
See, we have to be clear immediately that when I say I am conscious, you don't mean your body. My body is not conscious. When I say I am conscious, I'm referring to the field that controls my body that is conscious. And the field that is conscious may control more than one body, as far as I know. See, there is no reason why the consciousness has to control one body, just like the field of electrons doesn't have just one electron that it controls. It has the totality of electrons that exist in the space and time, which is probably 10 to the 82 or whatever, but a huge number, you see?
So what about the self? What about the identity? What about the uniqueness in you?
A cell, again, is conscious, but the consciousness of the cell is not in the cell. It is in the field that has similar cells as symbols, as bodies that are controlled by the field that then can act into this world in which the cells operate. So there's three levels of reality, as I mentioned before, and the conscious is only on the deeper level. It's not in the body, and it's even less in a pen that is simply, a physical, is physically a random collection, not quasi-random collection of atoms and molecules. that behaves, without any connection with a field. They are connected broadly with the many fields in which they, that makes the molecules and the atoms that disband. So,
Yes.
so we have to be very careful, because I noticed that, even when I say the consciousness is a field, in the consciousness is the inside of the fields, which can only be described by a quantum state that can only be described right now with the mathematics of Hilbert spaces, which are n-dimensional Hilbert spaces with dimensions which are complex numbers. So, the space-time that we believe is the background of reality has nothing to do with the Hilbert space, where we exist. I mean, we don't exist in Hilbert space. Hilbert space is a mathematical space that actually is capable of describing, not even describing, is capable of representing qualia. It can represent qualia. What does it mean? It means that it has the properties, the formal properties of qualia, but qualia can only be known by the field as an experience. See, so mathematics cannot give you an experience. Mathematics can only represent something. We have to, again, mathematics is the map. The territory is the experience.
We're all the time, I feel we're all the time walking this tightrope of what Whitehead called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, because we use all these powerful abstractions to refer back to our inner feeling of being alive, and we try to do both, but the moment we forget we're doing this, and that's a problem that phenomenologists also encounter. Like, what is math giving us about the structure of our own experience?
Yeah, most physicists think that the theory of reality is reality. Not so, not true. Even worse, they think that the simulation of a theory of reality is reality. That's even worse, because the simulation of a theory is not even the theory.
Well, they say that the universe itself is a simulation, which is like the ultimate grand pirouette.
Yeah, but can you, the simulation of a, plate of spaghetti is not the spaghetti that you eat, for Christ's sake.
Outside the matrix for sure. I mean, I know the time would fly. I have one more. Go ahead.
Instead, for an Italian, it must be right.
I can relate to that. I have one more. I will talk to you for much longer, but you've been very generous with your time. I like to think of science, what we call science, as something that stands on a stool, like it has three legs: theory, empirical work, experiments. But there's one part which is often not discussed so much, and I think it's needed, which is the socio-political, economical dimension to what scientists do. And that's why I was referring to these 200 plus theories that have been mapped by Robert recently and so on. How do you think we move forward collectively? Because, you can have your own theory, and I know Giulio Tononi very well, and he has explained to me integrated information theory, and everybody thinks their theory of consciousness is right or righter, better than all the rest. There is this funny quote from a paper whose author I always forget, apologies, that says, theories of consciousness are like toothbrushes. Everybody has their own and nobody wants to use another's, right? So how will we make progress? How we will progress together in this exchange of, well, you may be right here, you may be wrong, let's figure it out, let's step out, let's not identify ourselves and our egos with our own theories, let's give primacy to empirical work, but not be deluded by thinking that the data speaks like alone. We also need to interpret it. And I'm asking you this because you're clearly a very successful entrepreneur as well, so you know how to make things work at a collective level. So how can we do that now with the science of consciousness?
Well, if we're doing science, so we need to then, first we need to have a theory that can be tested and disproved, and then we need to test the theory. And the only way that you can test the theory is to disprove the theory that is not yours. Yours can be supported, okay, or can be disproved, but in any event, you can only disprove the you know, a theory by having one experiment that predicts this, and if you get this, you are supported, and if you don't get this, you are out of the game. And now we can do that. We have to do that. It's my next step is to go into the experimental things. For example, the first thing to prove, most theories are that of consciousness are that consciousness is a classical phenomenon. Tononi theory is a classical theory. It doesn't stand even the reason, because then you could create copies of conscious experiences, and we know that is impossible. So already it's out.
Well, that's the kind of dialogue that's needed, right? That's the kind of dialogue that's needed.
Of course. But but for example, then most theories of consciousness start with consciousness is a property of the brain. So one of the first experiments that I want to do to show that a tree has consciousness and it has no brain. Therefore, all the theories that says that the consciousness is a property of the brain are out of the way. And they're probably, more than half or probably 80% of the theories are out of the way just by one experiment. And on it goes. So it takes a series of experiments. You cannot do it with a crucial experiment like Michelson-Morley experiment.
Yes.
For example, that would be wonderful. But we may have, but look, entanglement. Entanglement, there are probably, I don't know, 20 different experiments to close all the loopholes that were thrown at it. So this one will be, maybe there will be 50 different experiments that will actually narrow it down and say, this is the most, plausible theory for now, because you have eliminated everybody else. So that's the practical way of doing it. It will take a lot of time, but that's the way to do it. And I'm old, but I will I will work as hard as I can to go through at least the first 3, 4, 5 steps. But then we need to also find ways that people can have extraordinary experience of consciousness, direct experience of being part of whole, part of one. That experience is the one that once you have it, you know that it cannot be other than that. And only people that didn't have it can argue that you are full of shit because you're saying such a thing. Okay, once they have it, and they have a real one, they know that it cannot be other than that. Because it took me that drove me for 37 years, no, for 34 years. It drove me to what I'm telling you today. It gave me the motivation and the energy to go and explain something that cannot be wrong, but it can be wrong in the details, but not wrong in the essence, in its essence, you see? It is like an inventor. It's like an inventor. I mean, I'm an inventor. Okay, I know what it means to invent. In your mind, you get a picture, and the picture is not the thing that is a representation of the thing, but you already know that thing that you have in your mind is possible to make, and then it may take 3 years or 10 years, and eventually you make it work. That's the same way that I'm approaching this problem.
Thank you, and I can see the passion in you as you're telling us this, and it will take us more hours to untangle that, because we're talking about scientific ways of knowing. But what you just said sounded like revelation in a way. That, and you're so certain that really nothing from at the outset would convince you otherwise, and that's so interesting that these both or more ways of approaching reality can coexist: scientific, rational, logical, intuitive, mystical. That's what we do at the Paris Center. I would say that's what we try to figure out. How can they all coinhabit?
When your consciousness is out of the body, okay, that it's out of the body. It's not an imagination. It's not. No. It's out there. When I was observing myself, because what I was observing was outside of me, and it was still me. Well, that's the, how can I explain that? If I say it that way, it's, you're crazy, right? Because, that's impossible because, clearly, yeah, that's impossible on an ordinary experience of consciousness.
Yes.
But when you have that experience, you know that you're not fooling yourself. You know that there is something there that you can explain. And when you, as you explain it, it becomes more clear. It becomes more, it makes sense. It connects. But it takes time, energy. That's why, it took almost 30 years to get a theory. And, and actually, only now I feel that I have a theory, starting with a postulate and then going from there, as opposed to trying to explain something with what we know. So that was the step that I made 6 months ago. That is 34 years from the beginning, just to get to the end of what I say. Now there is a theory, there is a postulate. This postulate is self-evident. That's the thing that I forgot to say earlier. Self-evident means that you and I and everybody knows that you are conscious and that you have some kind of free will. Whatever the scientist tells you, you don't have any, okay? They go against even your own self-evidence. Why? Because they want to support the theory that, is their creation. Come on. So I'm saying that, a postulate must be self-evident. If you read the postulates of quantum physics, it takes 5 years to understand them if you haven't studied in quantum physics, okay? Never mind to be self-evident. Then after you understand them, what they're actually saying, then you say, well, I got to accept it, but it is not self-evident. I'm starting from the postulate that one, the totality of what exists, is dynamic, holistic, and wants to know itself. That's the postulate. And that postulate allows you to explain quantum physics, why classical physics, and go from there.
That's so important that you mentioned this.
Because I know within myself that what I want deeper than anything else is to know myself.
Well, and that's how the big theories have been always built, not so much recently, like from these core truths of interiority upon which you can continue to build.
But never before have we tried to understand consciousness and free will scientifically. So they've always been understood by people that had extraordinary experience of consciousness, and so they were understood as a direct experience, but then that's not transferable. That is not, then there is no, you are not making any science. So you had to go beyond that also. You had to reach out to the other side, which is the scientific side, the stuff in space and time, as well as the other side, the spiritual side. So we need both. We need those things.
And I think you embody them both. And I thank you so much for it and for your relentless work throughout the decades. And I wish you many more healthy decades to continue working on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, sorry, we're a bit over time, but now we can open it up for comments and questions from the audience. Thank you very much, Federico.
Thank you both very, very much. At this point, we can open up to the audience. So if you'd like to come in and ask a question or make a comment, you can use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen that you'll find under reactions. Raymond, please come in and join us.
Wonderful talk. You said that consciousness without free will cannot act in the world. And your talk seems to combine these two elements, consciousness and free will. There's a state in Tibetan Buddhism called Rigpa, where an individual can reach a state of considered to be pure consciousness. So in thinking about how does a quantum field become a being or a self like me that consists of classical and quantum characteristics. And it seems to have something to do with what you said with free will. And what I'm wondering is, could you look at free will? I kind of think of it as creativity itself rather than free will, but could you look at going from a quantum field to a being there has to be some kind of a center that arranges or structures that your own quantum field, and that center or structure could be either free will or creativity.
All right. So in this way of thinking, we now go into a sort of a narrative that can help have a picture, but it would be before the postulates that would drive the scientific side of the equation, so to speak. In other words, for physics, it's sufficient to say that you start with fields. We start with fields that are conscious and have free will, and how those fields emerge, it doesn't matter. We don't know, which is what physics is already saying today. I mean, they say, where are the fields coming from? I don't know. They're there. That's it. Take it or leave it. So, but in this narrative that I have, if we start with one, then one is the totality of what exists. Is defined as the totality of what exists. But again, we have to be careful because here, well, let me finish. One is the totality of what exists, is dynamic, means that it's not the same instant after instant. It always changing. And is holistic, means it's not made of separate parts. In other words, everything is connected within one. You can never separate anything completely from one. There is always a connection. And by the way, my theory, where the quantum fields and the symbols are states of the fields, they actually are true to this statement. You cannot separate an electron from the field. The electron is a state of the field, inseparable from the field, like a wave of a sea. So when you start that way, then to that, so far I have described the universe described by quantum physics. The universe of quantum physics is holistic and dynamic, and it is all that exists. Even though it is not completely true, because as you know, quantum physics and general relativity are not united into a single field, and so you can go from there. But let's not let's stick to this simplification, because otherwise you can never make any progress. All right. So now I added to the universe described by quantum physics, I added the property that one wants to know itself, which is clearly, that's not physics, you would say. That's in fact the spiritual aspect of reality, the inner aspect of reality, which I have added. And when I say that, what it means is that wanting implies free will, or implies a desire, implies many things. Again, we have to be careful that at the foundational level, since one is not made of separable parts, even the concepts that we use cannot be separated. The concept must have gray regions where, the two concepts are both valid in those gray regions. It's like something is true and false at the same time in those gray regions. So that's the reality that we have. Once we have a reality that is not it's not reductive. It's not the reductionism of classical physics, where objects are separate. They're intended to be separate. So then when one knows itself, what happens? When one knows itself, it brings into existence a part whole of itself. It brings into existence something that has to contain all its potentiality, because it cannot know itself partially. It has to know itself entirely. But with the point of view with which it knows itself in that instant. The next instant, it can bring into existence another entity like the first, but not equal to the first, that has a different point of view. In fact, for one to know itself, it needs to make, if one is not three-dimensional, it needs to make a tomography in all possible directions in which it can know itself. And each direction in which one can potentially see itself, brings into existence a monad, a unit of consciousness, a field with the properties, because it is a part whole, it has exactly the property of one. In other words, it can reproduce itself, it can create other entities like itself. It wants to know itself. It has consciousness, it has free will. So consciousness and free will then are derivative, they are generated by one in its desire to know itself.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Raymond, for coming in. Layli, would you like to come in?
Thank you so much. Yes, I have actually a quick question. This has been absolutely fascinating and for me, very exciting. Thank you for presenting your ideas. If I want to understand more clearly exactly what you've been talking about, is this covered in your book, Irreproducible? And I think you mentioned you have another book coming out. How can I dig in on my own time to understand better so I come up with better questions for you?
Yeah, the book Irreducible, like consciousness is irreducible, is a fundamental property of one with which one begins, clearly not in time, but, exists, is a property of one. So Irreducible is the book, and you can buy it at Amazon. It's been, I wrote it in Italian almost 2 years ago, in September 2 years ago, and it's still a bestseller in Italy. And there have been many tens of thousands of copies sold in Italy, which is surprising because this is not an easy book, but it's a book that explains all those things. And the book that just was introduced, my third book, will be in English, hopefully in 6 months or a year, maybe, depending on the publisher. and then extends, what I wrote in Irreducible, but not by much. And so it's, Irreducible will give you pretty much all of the things that I said, except for a few things, is in the book.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Layli, for coming in. Thank you. Pankaj, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Faggin. Very enlightening. So one quick comment / question, and then one other question. So this overall, this wholeness that you experienced and that you try to describe now in your theory, can you say that it is the same concept or same experience of Brahman that the yogis talk about, or the Vedanta talks about, Upanishads talk about, the experience of Brahman, that Brahman wanted to know itself, and from there the whole creation happened? They say it in that language.
Yeah, I think that I recognize reading those texts. And by the way, there are many similar accounts from Parmenides, from Plotinus, many other philosophers that have talked about the unity of reality, one, and so on. Meister Eckhart and so on. Those, all have had extraordinary experience of consciousness. And it doesn't surprise me, because if you don't have one of those experiences, you cannot even imagine that it might be the way that they describe it. And so, but in my case, I found out later that those things were written, as opposed to finding out before. Right. Then, try to imitate. So for me, yes, the process was sort of backward. And but I believe that because of that, I was less influenced by the thoughts of others, and I could stay my
Yes.
experience needed to be explained and my knowledge of physics, where there
Right.
is no questions about, different physics. There is only one physics. And so I was able to connect the dots that otherwise I would have been, all over the
Yes.
place. Yeah.
Wonderful, sir. And one other quick question.
And by
So
the way, my name is Faggin.
Faggin. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for correcting me. Dr. Faggin, one question is, which has bothered me for quite a while, but I think that you are the right person to ask, and it's also very relevant to what you have talked about, that if everything in existence in space-time is made from these combinations of different quantum fields, and all of them have the same fundamental property of wanting to know themselves, then why doesn't this pen want to know itself? And can we say that the tree wants to know itself?
Okay. So first of all, the particles don't want to know themselves. These things in the world do not want to know himself. Again, don't confuse the body, the symbols, with the fields. The fields want to know themselves, not the bodies. So that's crucial, because we say consciousness is beyond the body, but then we end up always thinking that it is in the body. No, it's not in the body. The consciousness is not in the body. And then the last part of the question.
Some, like we, human beings, we do want to understand ourselves. That's why we are
let me tell you
investigating.
stuff. Okay, no.
So what's the difference between we wanting to know ourselves, but a tree?
Yeah.
Or does the tree actually want to know itself? And that's why it is reproducing.
Yeah. Again, just like consciousness and free will, we have to start in the postulate with one wanting to know itself, because there is no explanation. You cannot explain consciousness with something that is not conscious. And you cannot explain free will with something that does not have free will or creativity, which, by the way, I agree with the prior questioner that, creativity and free will are aspects of the same thing. Basically a free will decision is a creation because it's non-algorithmic. There is nothing, and it appears random, but it's actually a creation. So by starting with one, wanting to know itself, then you can explain why we, as being generated by one, can know ourselves. And also the concept of part whole is foundational. And one important understanding comes by recognizing, for example, that even our body is made of parts whole. Each of our cells is a part whole of the egg that created the organism. See, the egg, the genome of the entire egg is in each cell of the body. And a few people kind of thought about, what does that mean? I mean, this is an holographic principle, so powerful that it is the same holographic principle that, of course, comes from one, that to know itself must generate fields that also want to know themselves and have its own properties, because each part contains the whole, but not the whole in the silly sense, the potentiality of the whole. Each part contains the potentiality of the whole. That's why a cell later on in its own life can express aspects of its own genome that they were not expressed at birth. And that's what explains why there has to be epigenetics, for example, which until 20 years ago was absolutely considered nonsense by science. And now everybody understands that epigenetics exists. And it is a manifestation of the fact that the parts have the potentiality of the whole.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Pankaj, for coming in. We only have a few minutes left. Do we have time for one more question, Àlex, or would you like to?
Yeah, let's have it. because of the many raised hands. So if Federico is
Sigmar,
up for
please
one
come in.
more.
Sigmar, do come in.
Hi, Federico. I know you don't like comparisons, but I mean, I see you're the Krishnamurti of science, you know, because also he expressed truth can only be experienced, and you give so much emphasis on that. The question is if consciousness is a field of experience or the property of being, in that moment when you express the field wants to know itself, you personalize it. Or is it more what you mean, the field is a perpetual creation? That's my question. And the other question is then there a value system? Where does it come in, or is it value free? Does it mean it can destroy or it can create? So, and then where do we come in and contributing with our emerging consciousness to the larger field of consciousness? Is that where we as have the responsibility for humankind, for the earth, for the universe, for the unfolding of the consciousness? So I know several questions in one, but they all point in the same direction right there.
Well, first of all, it is impossible to, in my mind, to separate us from one. In other words, one knows itself through us. So in other words, you know, we are, you know, once one knows itself for the first time in that, with that particular point of view or perspective, it brings into existence what it knows. So knowing and existing are two aspects of the same thing. So already, you know, so many of the words that we use, you know, once you start from one, they have to, before they can be separated, they need to be seen together, you know, because the separation can only happen when you have a lot of them and you know, and for in some under certain conditions and for certain, yeah, under certain conditions, they can be separated for a while, but they cannot separate, they are not really separable, you see. So we have to be very careful because our concepts are generally designed in a way that we can say true or false, because that's the way we understand this. You know, we want to be sure, but already you know that even in mathematics, you cannot be sure of everything that you can say about that field of mathematics, you know, due to the Gödel's theorems. And so, you know, even logic itself doesn't allow you to prove the truth of any statement that can be made within a certain axiomatic system. So, you know, so many of the questions that now, as the questions go to one, where everything is interconnected to one, then we have to be very, very careful to pair and combine concepts that cannot be likewise separated, and therefore the distinctions are not so clear as when you discuss a machine, you know, which is made of clearly parts that are separable in this space and time. So having said that, then one knows itself through us, and we know ourselves by interacting with each other. So for myself to know myself, I need to also know the other, because we are all parts whole. So you have a piece of me, and you know, within yourself, and I have a piece of you within myself, and I have a piece of everybody else within myself. So again, you know, this notion that in order for me to know myself, I have to know everybody. First of all, that imply cooperation as opposed to competition. And so again, a bunch of stuff that we believe to be true like survival of the fittest or what have you, that we think is, oh, wow, true, they go out of the window because, at the fundamental level, there is nothing to do with survival. We once created, we don't die. So what the hell, the body dies, yes, but we don't. So there is nothing to worry about survival, whatever, So, I mean, there is so much, when you ask me that question, there are, it's difficult to answer directly because it implies many things which no longer make sense within this framework. Within this framework, everything is interconnected in ways that we need to kind of go very, very, with very softly, walk softly for a while until we, we see the relationships more clearly. So, I can only give you the baseline, the sort of the foundational thing, and then specific questions that I would have to think about it, and I cannot do that in real time. Yeah.
So it would be wonderful if you would hold a great meeting in Paris and we all come, right?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. I think we're just about 3 minutes past the hour. Thank you very much. Eleanor, do we have announcements before we close?
Well, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank both of you for being here today. Thank you, Federico, for taking the time out. And it was wonderful to have you as part of this series. And thank you, Àlex, as always, for curating this series. Just a reminder to everybody that our Beyond Bohm series continues again this weekend, as it will all of this summer, July and August. So every weekend, Saturdays and Sundays, you can join us exploring our series Beyond Bohm. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Àlex.
All right, briefly, just again, gratitude towards you, Federico. And it's clear, given what's going on in humanity right now, that we need to work. We need to work deeply. We need to work together. And I think work like yours, as we have experienced during these 90 minutes, is part of that moving forward towards a better future. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all the participants.
Great, wonderful.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you all. Goodbye, everybody.